Welcome to another deep dive. Today we're heading back to ancient Egypt.
Ooh, ancient Egypt.
Yeah, to explore a pharaoh who's really kind of shrouded in mystery.
Ah,
A pharaoh known as Akhenaten, the so-called heretic pharaoh.
interesting.
And we've got some excerpts from a book called The Heretic, the Story of Akhenaten,
Okay.
to sort of guide us through this deep dive. And trust me, his story is anything but a dry history lesson.
I mean, I'm intrigued already.
Right.
Yeah.
What is it about Akhenaten that makes him so fascinating to you as an expert in this field?
Well, it's the fact that he attempted this complete religious and cultural overhaul
Yeah,
of one of history's most enduring civilizations, right? I mean, Egypt, it's been around forever.
exactly.
So trying to unravel his motives and the impact of his actions, it's like piecing together a puzzle
Yeah.
where somebody deliberately took out some pieces.
So there are gaps in the historical record.
The huge gaps.
Okay, so that makes it even more intriguing.
Right.
So was this pharaoh a visionary who was just simply misunderstood? Or did his radical reforms throw Egypt into chaos?
Well, that's the million-dollar question, isn't it?
Yeah.
But to understand his legacy, I think we need to go back to the beginning, to his upbringing.
Okay.
Akhenaten, who was originally known as Amenhotep IV.
Oh.
He was born into a family that was just absolutely steeped in power and tradition. I mean, his father, Amenhotep III, ruled over a very prosperous and stable Egypt.
Okay.
And his mother, Queen Tai, she was a powerful figure in her own right, known for her unconventional beliefs.
So maybe those unconventional beliefs
Yeah.
planted the seeds
It's possible,
for his later action.
right?
I mean, it's fascinating how early influences can shape a person's worldview,
Absolutely.
especially someone who would go on to become pharaoh.
And when his older brother died, that paved the way for Akhenaten to ascend to the throne.
Okay.
And those seeds that you mentioned, those seeds began to sprout.
Yeah.
So initially, he followed traditional religious practices. But that all changed when he introduced this worship of Aten the sun disk as the sole god of Egypt.
Wow, talk about a radical shift.
Yeah.
To suddenly reject centuries of polytheism
Centuries.
must have sent shockwaves through Egyptian society.
Mm-hmm.
How did people react to such a dramatic change?
Well, just imagine the upheaval.
Yeah.
Especially for the powerful priests of Amun.
Okay.
Because their influence stemmed from this really complex system of polytheistic worship. This wasn't just some theological debate for them.
Right.
This was a direct threat to their economic and social power.
Yeah, because they relied on the temples and the rituals.
Absolutely.
All of it.
Yeah, the entire web of deities.
A whole intricate web. Yeah.
To maintain their position.
To maintain their privileged position.
Yeah, that makes sense. He wasn't just challenging religious beliefs.
Right.
He was disrupting a deeply entrenched power structure. What about everyday Egyptians?
Yeah.
How did they experience this shift?
For them, it would have been a time of immense uncertainty.
I mean, the temples they'd always known were suddenly shut down.
Wow.
The gods they'd always prayed to were suddenly deemed false.
Yeah.
And resources that once flowed into their communities were diverted to build Akhenaten's new capital city.
Oh, wow.
A city called Akhetaten, dedicated entirely to Akhenaten.
Speaking of Akhenaten, I read that the city's layout was completely different from traditional Egyptian cities. Was that deliberate?
Oh, absolutely.
Okay.
He didn't just want to change beliefs. He wanted to reshape the very fabric of Egyptian life.
Yeah.
Akhenaten was designed to be a physical manifestation of his religious vision. Unlike traditional cities that were often crowded and labyrinthine,
Right.
Akhenaten was open and spacious with wide avenues
Okay.
and temples specifically designed to capture the sun's rays.
So a city built to bask in the glory of Aten.
Exactly.
It's incredible how he used architecture and city planning to reinforce his religious ideas.
Yeah.
And this cultural revolution extended beyond just the city's structure, right? The art from this period
Yes.
is strikingly different, too.
You're absolutely right. The Amarna period, as it's known, witnessed a dramatic shift in artistic style.
Yeah.
Gone were the stiff, idealized figures of traditional Egyptian art.
Yeah.
Instead, artists began to depict figures, especially the royal family,
Okay.
in a much more naturalistic and even exaggerated manner. Like, one of the most striking examples is the portrayal of Akhenaten himself.
Yeah.
His elongated limbs, androgynous features, and like these really intimate poses with his family.
Okay.
It was a far cry from the rigid, formal depictions that we see with previous pharaohs.
It's almost like he wanted to emphasize the human aspect
Yeah.
of the divine.
Right.
To portray Akhenaten not as some like distant unknowable deity, but as a life-giving force
Mhm.
that was intimately connected to the royal family, and by extension to all of Egypt.
Exactly. And this shift in artistic expression, it wasn't just confined to sculpture and painting.
Oh,
No,
yeah.
it permeated literature, music,
Wow.
even the way daily life was depicted. Everything was designed to reflect Akhenaten's vision of a society that was just bathed in the light of Etin.
It's mind-boggling to think about the sheer audacity of it all.
Right.
To try to completely reinvent a civilization's religious and cultural identity in just a few years.
Yeah.
But these kinds of radical transformations rarely come without resistance.
Yeah, that's an understatement, I would say.
Right.
Because while Akhenaten may have had this grand vision,
Yeah.
it's clear that many within his kingdom felt threatened by the pace and scale of his reforms.
Yeah.
Like the priests of Amun who were stripped of their traditional power.
Right.
They probably saw him as a usurper.
Of course.
And the nobles who were accustomed to a certain level of influence, they may have felt marginalized by his centralization of authority.
And for the everyday Egyptians,
Exactly.
the closure of temples,
Yeah.
the disruption of their traditional rituals, the diversion of resources to build Akhenaten, it must have created a sense of anxiety and uncertainty.
Right. It's like pulling the rug out from under an entire society. Yeah.
And while we don't have detailed accounts of popular uprisings or rebellions,
Okay.
it's clear that Akhenaten faced considerable pushback.
Yeah.
His attempt to suppress dissent and enforce conformity probably just exacerbated the tensions.
It makes you wonder if he was fully aware of the growing resentment,
I know.
or if he was so convinced of the righteousness of his vision that he simply ignored the warning signs.
That's one of the most enduring mysteries surrounding Akhenaten.
Yeah.
Was he a true believer convinced that his reforms would ultimately benefit Egypt? Or was he a tyrant who was willing to sacrifice the well-being of his people to achieve his goals?
It's a question that historians still debate.
Absolutely.
But regardless of his intentions, the consequences of his actions were far-reaching.
Yeah.
When Akhenaten died, the backlash against his reforms was swift and decisive.
Indeed. It really was. His successor, most likely his son Tutankhamun,
Okay.
oversaw this really systematic effort to dismantle Akhenaten's legacy.
Wow.
Temples that were dedicated to Aken were destroyed or repurposed.
Images of Akhenaten were defaced or removed, and his name was struck from official records, almost as if the later rulers wanted to pretend that he never even existed.
Wow. That's a pretty drastic attempt to erase someone from history.
Yeah.
Makes you wonder, what were they so afraid of?
Right.
Why go to such lengths to condemn this pharaoh to oblivion?
I think it speaks to the level of disruption he caused. You know, his successors, they were determined to restore order, to return to those traditional ways that had served Egypt for centuries.
Right.
They saw his reign as an aberration, a dangerous experiment that really threatened the fabric of their society.
So they tried to sweep him under the rug
Yeah.
to pretend this period of radical change never happened. But ironically, that act of erasure only adds to his mystique, doesn't it?
Absolutely. The very fact that they've tried so hard to erase him from history
Yeah.
just makes us even more curious about his motives, his beliefs, and the impact he had.
It's like a historical whodunit,
It is.
where the clues are scattered and the answers are elusive.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's almost as if by trying to silence him, they inadvertently amplified his voice across the millennia.
Right.
We're still talking about him today, debating his legacy, poring over these fragments of evidence that he left behind.
And that's what makes Akhenaten such a compelling figure to study. You know, he challenges us to kind of reconsider our assumptions about ancient Egypt.
Okay.
We tend to think of it as this monolithic culture,
Right.
unchanging and timeless.
Yeah.
But Akhenaten's reign reminds us that even the most enduring civilizations,
Yeah.
they're capable of radical transformation,
Right.
however brief those moments might be.
It also makes you wonder about the ripple effects of his actions.
Uh-huh.
Even though his reforms were ultimately short-lived, could they have had a lasting impact on the way people thought about religion?
That's a fascinating question.
Yeah.
While it's difficult to draw a direct line from Akhenaten's monotheism to the rise of later monotheistic religions,
Yeah.
it's certainly possible that his ideas influenced the way people conceived of the divine.
Okay.
You know, he broke the mold.
Yeah.
He demonstrated that it was possible to challenge traditional beliefs
Right.
and propose a radically different way of understanding the relationship between humanity and the cosmos.
That's an incredibly powerful legacy, even if it was unintentional.
Yeah.
He opened up a realm of possibilities that others might not have dared to explore before.
And in a way, that's what makes history so captivating.
Hmm.
It's not just a collection of dates and names. It's a
Mhm.
story of human ambition, innovation, and the enduring quest to understand our place in the universe.
Yeah.
And Akhenaten, despite his flaws and failures,
Right.
he embodies that quest. He dared to challenge the status quo to envision a different future.
Yeah.
And even though his vision ultimately crumbled, it continues to inspire us to think critically about the world around us, to question the narratives that we inherit, and to imagine new possibilities.
So as we wrap up our deep dive into the life and legacy of Akhenaten, what's the one key takeaway that you hope our listeners walk away with?
Hmm. I think the most important takeaway is that history is rarely black and white.
Yeah.
You know, Akhenaten was neither a saint nor a demon. He
Right.
was a complex individual who made both brilliant and disastrous choices.
Yeah.
And his story reminds us that leaders, even pharaohs, are human beings
Hmm.
with all the flaws and contradictions that entails.
Of course.
And by studying their lives, we gain a deeper understanding not just of the past, but of ourselves.
Beautifully put. Akhenaten, the so-called heretic pharaoh, ultimately leaves us with more questions than answers.
He does.
But perhaps that's the greatest gift of all. He challenges us to keep questioning, to keep digging deeper, and to embrace the complexities of history.
Couldn't have said it better myself.
Well, thanks for joining us on this fascinating deep dive into the world of Akhenaten. We hope you've enjoyed the journey.
Always a pleasure.